Welcome back, listeners. So, MC and I would like to introduce a new topic this season since we recognized season one was heavily Scrum based. And we are quite overdue for a change of scenery. So, I want to ask you all, listeners out there, how good are you at prioritizing what you need to get done for the day at a sustainable pace? I want you to really think about this and be brutally honest with yourself. And yes, MC, I'm looking right at you. Hee hee. How often are you telling yourself that I'm going to sacrifice sleep to get all this done? I'm going to skip lunch to get all this done. I'm going to blow off my friends and potentially my family to get all this done. I'm going to half ass this so I can get everything else done. But what if you said, and wait for it, no? What would happen? Like, will an apocalyptic avalanche of self-deprecation ruin us all? I think not. But what if you actually practice true focus by saying yes to a couple of things that will get done without sacrificing your sleep, your health, or your mental health by practicing the variability to say no? No, that's not going to get done today. Let it go. No, I can't help with that right now. Let's try again next week. No, that's not my priority right now, and let it go. No, I need to practice self-care and actually go to sleep tonight to live another day of prioritization. And you know what they call that? WIP limits, not WIP unlimited. I love the way Steve Jobs puts it. Like people think focus means saying yes to the thing you've got to focus on, but that's not at all what that means. It means saying no to another 100 good ideas. So listeners, we welcome you to today's episode, WIP or Whipped, with co-host MC and our newest speakers, Svetlana Kops and Ranjit Sellers. This is Agile Disrupted. So, WIP limits. It has such an unattractive track record because somehow we as humans associate being whipped when a tool is telling us you need to work at a sustainable pace to be efficient and successful because what you were doing was not working. So, and to be honest, WIP limits have always encouraged a culture of work that is done versus work that is undone. And we all know what that means. But see, the tools we use doesn't guarantee a culture that we seek. The people do. So, Lana, I want to kickstart this discussion by asking you, can WIP limits expose a team's inability to prioritize? And how have you dealt with that?
Well, great question. And that's one of my favorite topics. And you easily can find yourself whipped using the WIP limits.
Yes.
Well, when executed right, I believe that it can really improve your flow and provide predictability to the team, but only under one condition. The team needs to really understand what they're doing, commit to that, and get their buy-in. Otherwise, you'll get a team that is cheating on that and will try to find workarounds, and you'll really find yourself whipped. So I think the inability of teams to prioritize can come out really easily. If it's the VIP is too low, then you'll find idle people. If it's too high, you can find idle tasks. So you really need to be careful about that. And I don't know if that's right now is the time for stories or not.
Always.
But I had a wonderful team that always respected the limits, and that's what I was educated them to do, coaching them to do. And I was surprised that in the evening I would always see that we are about to compromise one of the status columns, and I was like, interesting. I want to see what they do in the morning, and then every morning the stand up it looks perfect. And I was like, that looks interesting. So what was happening? The product owner was going at the board in the evening, and the items that were blocked for day 2 or 3, she was removing them from the Kanban board and moving them back to the backlog so that we avoid the red color in the column. So
oh my God.
When I discovered that was a mystery. It's like a little, creatures come in the night and make the board perfect. But the product owner did not want me to see this red status column because that was the conversation starting in the morning. So if that's what you experience and you would come in the morning, everything is perfect. So if the team cannot really pursue the impediment that it says it and track the root cause, you will find yourself whipped. You really need to, it's okay to, exceed the limit, but you need to get back there as soon as possible and have the conversation, have the like bravery to have the conversation as a team. Why did this happen? So that you can actually improve the flow you have and solve the problems. Or you can invite summon the creatures to remove the blockers from the board, and everything is perfect.
Oh my
That's like
god.
that's like the telltale situation of, well, if we just kind of ignore it, it'll just go away.
Creatures
Right.
of the night, MC. Creatures of the night.
That's
Like
great.
all the shit that goes on in Jira at night when the team's asleep. My god, it's like the scene of every horror film. Like honestly. So, what do you think, Ranjit?
I agree. It's kind of, it seems to me like the more mature a team gets, it becomes less important. It's kind of, from my perspective, it's like a tool to help a team mature. Once a team is really like well trusting with each other and has a good cadence, they're usually pretty good about pivoting. Things come in, things move out. Things are a lot more natural. You're looking at that kind of as a guiding rail a lot less often. But yeah, I totally agree. I mean, when people start doing things for the sake of the process, it gets really hairy really quickly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I really, really love how you phrase that, Ranjit, because in my head, that's how I function. But I've never said it that way, or I've never heard anyone say it that way. Of like, it's a tool, it's a tool, or really a technique to mature. Because I think that's where a mature team, for the most part, they usually won't need whip limits. Though they should be pretty understanding of I'm working on this and not that. But what's
Right.
interesting though is the only part where I guess I would challenge or say it doesn't necessarily impact the team, the ability to prioritize, is on the flip side of it, where maybe the creators on the team, right? And I'm going to say that to encapsulate designers, data scientists, developers, all that stuff, all those roles. Maybe they're just really good at their job and they're able to multitask. And that's not to say work on two things at once, but maybe I work with developers all the time where I'm like, hey, how's everything going on this kind of solo project that only you're working on? And they'll reply back, oh, I'm working on this other thing. And in my head, I'm like, but that's not your priority. And
Yep.
they're like, no, I know, I just needed a break from that. I needed a mental break and work on something completely different. And Ranjit, I know, I would assume for you as a developer, at some point, if you just keep banging your head against the wall, my assumption is your productivity is going to go down and you just need to work on something else to just almost
Yeah.
clear your thoughts. So that's where I think, and I guess it comes down to maturity, but where if you're mature enough as a developer, you can actually ignore whip limit, not ignore, but not use whip limits, work on multiple things at once in a way to almost be better or be more efficient because you need those mental breaks in the stuff you're working on.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, I've worked with some pretty brilliant engineers in my time, and some real rock star people who they'll be spinning many plates, and like something like that could be very restrictive for someone like that, and their kind of happiness is based on their productivity, and their kind of that's like their whole deal. They're pumping out mass amounts of work, and sometimes they have to pivot. They might solve this problem over here by pivoting and doing something over here. So I agree a lot. I mean, with that, wholeheartedly. I think that it takes a level of maturity not only from the team's perspective, but like as an individual contributor. When you're in the weeds or when you're pulling too much on your plate, you kind of have to gauge that for yourself. But if you're working well with your team and you're communicating with them, then it doesn't really become an issue. Where I see it become a problem in prior experiences is when you've got people who are overloading themselves, but they're not really collaborating or communicating with the rest of the team,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
it becomes like a big impediment there.
Well,
Yeah.
one thing I would add though, it really reveals an ability to prioritize and speaks about the team only if the team participates in setting those WIP limits. We know the teams where the team doesn't have much say in that process. They just come up one day and the board has all the limits, and sometimes they don't serve the team well enough.
That
Yeah.
sounds like a backstory.
Dot
but
dot dot.
yes, exactly. No, you guys bring up valid points. I mean, there's been so many studies out there about how breaks actually help you become more productive, and sometimes that means working on another thing that's not directly related to I guess the goal at hand for whether it's a sprint or not. But like people will talk about Scrumban, people will talk about Kanban, and they'll incorporate different elements from each of the agile frameworks and methods. What I noticed over time with trends is that sometimes WIP limits become this guardrail for people who cannot fundamentally say no to work. Like they keep piling on and saying yes to so much work only because it may be related to a culture of the organization. It may be related to their relationship with their manager. It may be related to archived history, and we have no idea because we're just coming into the picture now. So that's when I kind of think about sometimes WIP limits might allow a team that's never communicated with each other, similar to what you were saying, Ranjit, that doesn't talk to each other, and it forces them to collaborate because they got a limit of 3. Like they can't pull in more work, and like the 2 is still stuck, but your work is done. So you're gonna help. You got to talk to the other team member. Like, hey, what's going on? Like, I want to pull in more work, but again, that's really up to the maturity of the team because maybe eventually the WIP limit becomes a practice and they don't need to regularly revisit it. They are able to work in predictable ways and at a sustainable pace. MC, what were we going to say?
So I have a gripe.
Mm-hmm.
I have a supreme gripe to pick with a lot of the trainings and the videos and the way WIP is taught. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
if your testing column has a WIP limit of 2 and the testers are there, but the developer is done, what do? Someone has to go help test. Here's the problem I see with that. And Ranjit,
Mm-hmm.
I'm really interested in your opinion on this because I don't know if I've ever really asked a developer this outright. I think I've always assumed it based on conversations. If your skill set is Java developer and maybe there's a ticket in like testing, if that's not your skill set and that's not your passion as a person, right? Forget employee, forget team member. If that's not your passion as a person managing their career, why the fuck are we training people to say, go help test or tester, go help develop? Because I feel like that's
Mm-hmm.
just fundamentally a wrong way to teach. Like you're basically saying, tester, go help develop because there's too much stuff to do. Like it's not your skill set. And it's for me, I think it's just this internal conflict of the debate for like T-shaped employees, right? Where you're deep in one
Mm-hmm.
area and maybe you're wide across in others. And the longer I've worked, because I drank that T-shaped Kool-Aid a long time ago, but the longer that
Mm-hmm.
I've worked, the more and more I find a developer will raise their hand and say, I'm an Angular developer and I don't want to learn C#. I don't want to learn .NET. I don't want to learn Java. This is what my passion is. Don't ask me to help the backend developer because I'm not going to do it and I'm not able to do it. So I'm anxious, Ranjit, to hear your opinion on that. Am I assuming wrong or do like a lot of developers like legitimately think that way?
I mean, I've met different types of people. When I don't know if we should open the can of worms when you're mentioning like QA and like testing because the engineering world is kind of evolving to the point where people are expecting developers to write most of the tests these days, in a lot of
Yeah.
cases. But
Mm.
that being said, I feel like someone who's a very like a specialized automation engineer is going to write much better tests than the developers will, especially since that's like their area of expertise. They're going to go a lot deeper. They don't understand the code base like the person who wrote it, so they're going to write better tests as a result of that. But when it comes to being a developer and like only wanting to code in one language, I feel like there's nothing wrong with that. Especially, I mean, if you're just going to be an Angular developer, my expectations for you better be damn good at your job. Like you better be really good at Angular, because if you're not going to touch anything else and your only responsibility is writing like straight up TypeScript or JavaScript or whatever you're writing front end stuff in, the bar has to be high for that. Like you've got to take on a lot more responsibility. You got to bring a lot more of that burden on yourself. Whereas, yeah, like I'm a little bit different in that way. I don't like to be stuck in one area. I kind of like to move around and develop in different parts of the stack. Like I've been a full stack developer for a number of years. So yeah, I mean, I think it just depends on the person. I don't think either way is right or wrong. Somebody who's specific in Angular and spends all their time doing Angular is going to be better than I am at doing Angular just because they spend more time there. But I bring a different kind of value to the team where I can see problems that may arise across the stack where they're just kind of limited to one area. I can fix problems faster than when they're conflicting, like there's something wrong in the database or there's something wrong in the back end. Like .NET is my favorite thing. It's where I prefer to write code, but that doesn't mean that I'm gonna say no. I'm not gonna write Angular. I'm not gonna like go do some stuff in the database or like design something. I kind of like being all over the place because it gives me exciting new challenges to do or to fix, every day. So, but that's just my own personal experience. I don't look down on somebody because if they want to just stick to something they love, but I do expect them to like bring it.
Hey, okay, that's what I heard, listeners. So if you're an Angular developer, you better bring it. Apparently, according to Ranjit. But no, that's completely fair, Ranjit. I mean, like cross-functional team members is the dream, but it shouldn't be the expectation because some people do have the right to choose like what their passion is. MC, what you were describing sounded like for some reason it sounded like a team that was just kind of put together and wasn't staffed intentionally. Like, why would the application be in multiple languages? Like, I would think it was a team that made that decision together when they were building the application or when they were assigned the application. But I don't want to get too into the details of that. Essentially, I think utilization is very important when it comes to team development. What Kanban teaches you in the Kanban guide is that when you look at lead time and you look at the flow of work, you are constantly looking at impediments because you do have those WIP limits. If you're constantly blocked and you're going to be blocked with 3 items in progress inevitably for a longer period of time than it should be in because there's an impediment. So Kanban exposes that very easily. And I think that's the intention we try to work towards. Something that I do want to touch on with you all that I'm sure we all have experienced, and this could happen in Scrum and this could happen in Kanban. Like, it is not impervious to any agile team. So, what happens when you start the work, whether it's in Kanban or you start the sprint, and to do is just loaded? And someone made the executive decision, or the team made the executive decision, like, well, it has to get done. Like, we're just going to shove it all in there and just see how it goes. How have you guys dealt with that kind of situation?
I mean, I've always told the teams, unless you're like legitimately working on it, or in like the off chance where like you're blocked, don't move it into start. Right? Don't move it into in progress start, whatever column you're calling it. Right? Don't move it unless you're legitimately working on it. Because I've worked with folks, not just devs, where they'll move everything in, and I'm like, how? Like, those are literally sequential. Like, how are you actively how are you deploying to test and prod right now at the same time? Like, that shit don't fly.
No.
They're like, well, I gotta do some things for both, and I'm like, okay, well then let's have like separately, we'll have a different conversation about like how we're dealing with our stories, because you can't deploy to test and prod at the same time. It just doesn't work like that. So maybe we need to have a different conversation about these stories.
We do.
But like, so I've seen that a lot where they just move everything in right away, and then there's like no clear picture of like what's legitimately happening.
Yeah,
Right.
they're not being honest. I mean, that seems like another issue, and maybe there's a little bit of trust issue there. They feel like
Yeah.
if they don't have 5 things in progress, and they're not like pulling their weight or something like that. I
Big
don't know.
Brother's watching.
I mean, when I join a new team, I'm guilty of this. When I join a new team, I overload myself, and I do that.
Oh, why
I
do
do
you
that-
do that, Ranjit?
Well, because I need to prove that I'm worth it to the team, right? I just joined a new team.
Aw.
I just the way
Okay.
I am. So I take on a lot. I put way too much of myself. I work extra time. It's not probably that great, but it's just what I do. And
Yeah.
eventually, once I've earned the trust of the team, that settles down, to the point where I'm actually working within a good means, where I have a better balance. Yeah.
No, that makes sense. Like, trust is definitely, I mean, how often is trust linked to flow, guys? The actual lead time of a team. Like, people aren't talking, things are stuck in progress. Or, like, in my experience, something that happened with the previous team, like the first day of the sprint, everything's in progress. And I just laugh my ass off. Like, what? Like, it's only the first day. Oh, we've been working on it for a couple sprints. I'm like, okay, that's a different conversation. My God. Like,
all I see right
yeah.
now is the Harry Potter gif or meme from
Yeah.
Sorcerer's Stone, where he's like, the fire's behind him and he's yelling, "You liar!" That's what it is. Like, you ain't working on 6 things. Like, don't give me that BS.
Exactly. And it stresses us out. Like, I had a previous conversation the other day, and MC, were in that conversation. Like, you're still an advocate for the team. Like, technically Kanban doesn't have like a Kanban flow master. There's no scrum master for a Kanban team, but you're there to support the team and help make sure that they are successful in their roles. And then when you see that, you get worried. Like, where is the boundary? Where is the balance? Where is sustainable pace in all that? Because I'm not seeing it right now. Not from a visual perspective. And again, Kanban will like harp on making the work visual. Like they manifested the Kanban board. But when you see that, that's very concerning because that does affect work-life balance in itself. That affects the delivery of your products. That affects efficiency. Something that I want to harp on, we talked about predictability when it comes to team members who overload themselves. What about the inverse? What about teams have mastered their predictability and become complacent in their flow of work? They don't got to pull in no more work. Like they could. Like they could put in more work and increase and update the WIP limits because they're not forever set in stone, but they've gotten pretty badass and they're just like, we've only set it to 3. I don't need to set it to 6. I'm fine. Like, how have you guys dealt with those situations? Or has that even happened?
I would say in mature teams, peer pressure is that kind of check and balances for the team that actually prevents this behavior. But I can totally see it happen, especially in mature teams, because it's an interesting thing that WIP limit on an individual level can be actually as a constraint can be a thing that can make you free. Okay, you're done.
Exactly.
It's an interesting where a
Boundaries.
constraint can actually make you feel free. Like, okay, you are not overwhelmed. You're done with you have your 2 things in progress. They're minor and you're like good with that. And you don't want to strive for anything else. But the truth is, use your judgment and seek balance. Like I usually try to and teach my teams to respect the limits. But there are times when you're in trying to reach to a deployment and do things. So there are times to actually, work your ass off.
Agreed.
And it's okay
There
to
is
forget
definitely a
about
balance.
WIP limits, disrespect them for a day or two, when it's like take one for the team.
It sounds like we just need to find balance in the force.
Oh God,
That's
That's
what you're.
Is that the way, MC? Is that what I'm hearing?
This is the way.
I think Lana nailed it though. It has to be. It almost has to be from peer pressure.
Yeah.
Because the product owner doesn't know how long something's going to take.
Mm-mm.
The tester's not going to know how long something's going to take to develop. Like vice versa, in any situation, you're not going to know in someone else's role. Like, oh, well, how long should this really take? Your peers will. So
Yeah, exactly. The one person that's going to call you out and say, "Hey, like I feel like you've been just kind of dragging along. Like, do you feel more motivated to like tackle on more work? Can we like create a conversation with the team?" And they're like, "Nah, like I'm just going to fill the space. Why would I say yes to more work, please?" Like
if you're getting called out like that, you've messed up big time. Like you should never really actually need to be like verbally called out. I mean, you can leave little hints or
Yeah.
kind of something like that, but if you're being like straight up told at that point, you've effed up pretty bad.
Oh
So
man, they got caught.
So let me pull out the soapbox a little bit.
Oh boy.
And this is for any Agilist, Scrum Master, Coach, Agile Lead, whatever the hell title you have, right? You're the facilitator, servant leader of the team. Learn a little bit about what the hell it is your team is doing. I'm not asking you to become a developer or to take a class, but take some interest and ask them, what does it actually take to accomplish this? Because Ranjit, you brought up a really good point of no one, unless they're in your role, they don't know what it is. But like I personally have taken the time to understand the technology a little bit. And I joined a team a couple years ago and I'm still working with that team and we have a great relationship. However, now if they have a story to add a field to a database, that's now a 1-point story. It used to be a 3-point story. And I called bullshit on them. And I was like, no, I know what it takes to add something to add a column to a table. I've seen other teams do it. There's no reason it takes 2+ days to add a column to a table. Tell me why it does. Now, I didn't tell them they were wrong. I've explicitly said, tell me why it actually takes that. And they gave me, some good answers, some not good answers. I was like, all right, cool. You're like overinflating it for like organizational BS reasons. That's not accurate. Well, because they
It's
were
so true.
yeah, but they're factoring in like, oh, I got the database architect and he's on a different team, and I was like, that's a crappy way to set up your org, but that has nothing to do with you. The points that we're putting on this are for your effort, and when you factor in WIP limits, right? If you're overinflating that story because of an outside force, like no, we need to have a different conversation about our workflow here, so we can in our workflow identify I've sent this to an external source and they have to do something before we can see it through. So, I'll get off my soapbox, but learn about what people on your teams are doing, because to Ranjit's point, you'll be able to call BS,
Yeah.
but they'll respect you a whole lot more if you can go in and say, hey, I don't think we should be rebasing our branch in Git. The bad things happen when you rebase. And they might look at you like, the hell does MC know about Git?
Say what?
I don't know that much, but I know rebasing is like usually bad. Usually bad things happen when you rebase your branch. So anyways, I'll get off my soapbox.
No, you make a fair point, MC. Like you as any and just being a team member, like make an investment to what your team is delivering. My God, if I hear another trainer talk about the Toyota story with Kanban, I will just scream at them like, they were making fucking cars. We deliver a service. Like I will just die. But the thing is, make an investment. Like if you were asked what value does your team deliver? I have no idea what your team does in that business unit. Please explain it to me. And as a team member, as a team lead, as a scrum master, as a flow master, I'm going to use that right now, but by the way, if you're a team member, you want to know what your team is successfully delivering to their customers at minimum. You don't even have to be a developer or a product owner to answer that question. So I absolutely agree with you, MC. And what I will say though, me being on that rant about providing a service, I mean that is a huge factor in the format and the method that the team follows. Now, it won't always be a framework. In fact, I was talking to someone else about this too. Like, I actively and openly admit that the teams that I'm working on now, they are not Scrum teams. They're not Kanban teams. They are label list teams that adopt various elements of various agile methods and frameworks. And that's completely fine. Scrum does not mean success, people. Kanban does not mean success either. My God, it is a tool to expose things. So off that soapbox, the next topic that I would like to bring. So Lana, I'm going to ask you this question. So WIP limits alone won't help undone work or a fragmented team. Do you agree or disagree? What are your thoughts?
That's a tough one. I mean, it just depends where your team is, right? If you work as a team, if you have connections with the other teams that are involved in end-to-end delivery, so you have all the pieces of the chain together, that absolutely can still be a truth. So WIP limits can still help you improve your flow and get the information about where you are, your process, what's wrong, and the clocks will still communicate you where like the waste, the constraints exist. So I think it just depends on how you work with what you got. If you respect the limits, if you're honest about them, if it's like intellectual honesty as a team. I think if you respect it, what I noticed before is that I had one team that had an interesting process. So they had a Kanban board that different teams had access to, and the WIP limits were estimated independently. So that the team that was handling majority, like 80% of delivery cycle, would set their WIP limits, but then the team will other teams would have their columns in the status, and they would have their own WIP limits, which is interesting. When you combine and sum up all the WIP limits, you see that you have the number of the stories on the board that actually, if you add it up and divide by the number of team members, you would have like 6 per person. So that doesn't give you any information, that doesn't help you manage the flow. So it's just, again, it's the question about working well together versus with limits or without the limits.
Yeah, exactly. And people think, oh, we religiously follow WIP limits. We are a successful team. Lies. Okay. Let me say a couple things to that. So like the team will be done, and I say done because like it's like done and it's in the hands of the customers. But done meaning it's gone past in progress. It's gone through all the statuses. It is officially out of the team's hands and it's sitting in an environment. This is where many frameworks will like overanalyze what done means. And that's what I mean. Like the work may be done in your Kanban board. The work may be done in your sprint, but it's sitting somewhere and it's not actually delivered. And sometimes people will lose track of that. Like all this work has like clogged up into an environment and like we're going to release 3 months from now. My God, like that release day, it's called go live. It is horrible. That's the context I was thinking of with that statement. Like sometimes WIP limits become, I don't know, misinterpreted for the wrong use. And the flow actually still remains clogged. Like even if the work has gone through the entire Kanban board. What do you think, MC?
I was gonna say that's like every metric in the agile space. They all get misused in one way, shape, or form at some point in
Yeah.
time. Not all the time, but at some point in time. So I look at it. You know, we were talking earlier about the roles and stuff like that. Like in some regard, you could consider that a fragmented team, but I just think the WIP limit. I agree. The WIP limits alone won't help with undone work. You've got to have, and I think Lana, you said it, the maturity to be able to go out and say, you know, whatever's wrong, the flow's wrong, this part isn't done, Tabby didn't hold up her end of the bargain, so Ranjit can't pick up the next thing, like whatever it may be. WIP limits alone aren't gonna do that unless you're mature enough to have those open and honest conversations. Otherwise, you're just going to throw your hands up in the air and say, this isn't working. And then you go back to waterfall and waste a bunch of money.
Well, just giving you the information, right? Like you do a Google search. So that gives you information about like what's wrong with your process. It's like about what you do with this information.
Yeah. Oh, that brings me to a great quote. Process. Okay. So something that David Anderson, co-writer of Kanban, he wrote the fact that like you can't just stand up a Kanban team. Like it's a fallacy. Like his quote is, choose to use Kanban as a method to drive change in your organization because you're subscribing to the view that it is better to optimize what already exists. So it being a process, a process in your organization that already exists and you're trying to optimize it. And he says, because that's easier and faster than trying to do an agile transformation and trying to fundamentally change how all your teams deliver work, like work with what you have. And I love that quote because that should be like plastered on the book before you even read the book, like just in big giant letters, because you want to work with what you have so far and optimize it because your flow exists for a reason. And I know this is the segue of where a lot of waterfall projects get reprimanded because they've followed legacy processes for so long and they weren't challenged to be optimized. But that's a great place to start, to be honest. Don't just have this legacy organization that's done waterfall projects for most of its existence and then be unreasonable for your people and go through this painful agile transformation that they have no knowledge about. Like optimize your existing process, ease into the swimming pool, like because that swimming pool is going to be cold.
And even if you're not optimizing your existing process, like, you know, your quote leads me to Ken Schwaber's quote of Scrum is like your mother-in-law. She's going to point out all your flaws or your faults.
Exactly.
Right? You've got to be able, and this is the hard part in terms of, and I know we're on a tangent here, but this is the hard part in organization building. You've got to be able to establish an environment of trust where a developer feels comfortable enough to stand up and say, this isn't working. I'm not able to create value in this type of an environment. How can we change that? Right. And a scrum master or a coach or an agilist or whatever needs to be able to stand up to their manager and say, this isn't working. We need to make a change. So it's one of those. Kanban will do the same thing. It'll expose your flaws. And to your point, Tab, you can't just stand up a Kanban team. You've got to be in the organizational mental state of saying, we're going to look at these flaws and we're going to address them. Otherwise, you're just throwing shit at the wall and hoping it sticks.
And what's funny about that whole concept, like that concept is in so many business degrees, like, and just so many lean practices. It's not foreign to us, but it's packaged in some sort of selling point called agile consulting. And it's like sought after. We need an agile transformation. This is what's popular right now. But no, you have what you need to just unpack and optimize and figure out ways where you're seeing blockers. Start there. I like what you added there, MC, because I think people decide and choose Kanban many times, not always, thinking that it's easier. It's not a prescribed framework, it's a method, right? It doesn't have any defined roles, no defined ceremonies. It has a couple of tools in place for you to be successful in visualizing your flow. But the one thing that I will say that a lot of people who are passionate about Kanban that don't bring up is policies. And I love the way policies is described in Kanban because you have to establish a policy to follow the WIP limit. And in Scrum, they call it the team agreement, or I guess just in any
Right.
agile team. But policies are a requirement almost to be successful in understanding the flow of your Kanban team. Anyway, going on to the next question. Oh,
Let me
go ahead,
add
Ranjit.
one last
Yeah.
thing to your tangent. So you mentioned that like businesses that are moving from waterfall or to older styles of development, being able to spin up Kanban is a way to start getting things done. What's hilarious is that reminded me of my first development job where
Yeah.
I felt like I was the most productive I've ever been throughout my career.
Ah.
It was literally a to-do list. We started at the top, we prioritized it, and then we went through the to-do list and like this is done, this is done, this is done. And we got
Yeah.
so much, it was just insane. We were insanely productive. It was
Mm-hmm.
just so simple, right? And it's like that kind of concept of going from, well, we have all of these problems, how do we attack these problems? Well, one at a time. It was just reminded me of that experience and how like it can be that simple sometimes, right?
Exactly. And it's such a fallacy thinking Kanban is easier than Scrum. Scrum is actually easier. You have a lot
Yeah.
of prescriptive rules to follow and you can easily adopt them. But in Kanban, you have to establish flow with the least amount of impediments as possible. You actually have to talk to your leadership to talk about these impediments that's blocking your flow and create policies as a team and hold each other accountable. Anyway, I'm sure all you listeners know the Kanban guy. So, next question I'll bring up is this is something that I was speaking about earlier when I opened the episode. So, saying no. How comfortable is an agile team working at a sustainable pace and saying no to work that's past their capacity?
Well, again, it's about trust. It's about the team that you got. There are, of course, some shields in place, like your product owner, your scrum master, or your flow manager, whoever like you call it, agilist. The people who are there to protect you, to reinforce and say, "Hey, guys, you're just over your capacity. It's okay." So someone to shield you from the outside. At the same time, there is a power inside the team to say, "Hey, I think I already got too much. Maybe someone help me here or there or something." It's just natural process. No one can really reinforce this balance. It comes from the outside and inside the team balanced. And usually when the team is immature or there is no trust and psychological safety in the team, you will never hear no. And you would see that someone's swim lane, someone's column is growing like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tasks, and the person never says anything, and that might be a
Agreed.
problem.
Yeah, definitely. And just saying no is such a fundamental ability as a human being. I think we all just struggle with it, period. But we try to practice as much as we can. But MC, you're about to say something.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I personally have had to learn to say no because I do too many things as it is. Hence, why you're making fun of me earlier, Tabby. But I think like one of the techniques I try to give my teams is like if you're uncomfortable with saying no or something like that, there's other techniques and ways to do it that make you feel more comfortable. So for me, like I just bring comedy and self-deprecation to it. So if like a boss asks me to do something and I'm like, oh, I could do that, but I'm doing too many things right now, I'm just going to reply, I really want to say yes, but for my sanity, I'm going to say no. And everyone will get a little chuckle out of it. And at that moment, like, I'm
Yeah,
not the bad guy for saying no. Like, I made everyone laugh, so I'm not the bad guy. And I think
comic relief.
teams need those skill sets and the understanding of, look, you don't have to just be a stonewall and say no, because I think to directly answer the question, how comfortable are they? I don't think most teams are comfortable because, there's this incorrect viewpoint of like the product owner and the scrum master, who are both a part of the team, are somehow above the rest of the team, the creators on the team. Or like the manager could come in and kind of impact the WIP limits or what the team's committed to, off to the side. So then there's just this fear of, well, if person A is giving me work, they must be above me. I'm a subordinate, so I can't say no. So I think we've got to be able to give folks techniques and methods and the safe space, most importantly, to say no.
Yeah,
Yeah,
agreed.
it's kind of similar to it's a team culture thing, right? Because
Mhm.
if it's similar to if the team culture doesn't allow like failure, you've got an issue because people won't take the risk to like fail and learn from their failures and stuff like that. It's the same thing. If the culture's like you can't say no, then you're gonna have a pretty unhealthy team.
Exactly. And to be honest, I reflect on the many times people have told me no. And when I was younger, oh, my ego was bigger than my height. Like, I don't think the world could contain my ego. Like, why are you saying no? Why don't you have time? I can do everything. What is your problem? Like, and they were trying to establish healthy boundaries, which I didn't appreciate a long time ago. But you think about that now, and when someone tells you no, like, honestly, I'm not going to be able to do this, I'm not going to be, I don't have time to help you, I'm sorry, it's a form of honesty. And you're showing kindness to the other person by saying, no, I can't work on this right now, I'm not going to be successful, it's going to be half-assed, maybe this is something we can work on at a later priority. But that goes with what we work on every day with our teams too. Like, these are fundamental decisions we make as human beings every day of where our time goes, and the same applies to the flow of work that we accept as a team. Go ahead, Lana.
Let's be honest, there are, like, different types of people in the teams, and no matter how like good you're going to trainings or anything, introverts, extroverts, there are a lot of people who can find it impossible to say no. It really gives them stress, and I believe in this regard, in this situation, Kanban can be this safety net, because if implemented
Mm-hmm.
right, it should protect you. It's not about doing less work, it's about doing less work at the same time. So technically, right, you have the work in progress limit in every state. And if all of your work, again, is reflected on the board, then technically you cannot pull more work that you can accomplish. The problem is that very often we disrespect the limits, or half of the work is hidden from the board. In the stand-up, you would say, oh, like, look, I
Oh
look at your
man.
board and you actually like free, like, great, you can probably take on 2 tasks. And the person is like, when he begins to talk about how many things he has to achieve today, is like, wow, that's like doesn't match the board even close.
What are you even talking about? Like what is
It's
it,
like
all
this
this
gray
extra work?
backlog, hidden backlog.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
That
Like
never happens.
they're
What do you mean?
this long list, like, okay, I must be hallucinating because I don't see any of that shit on the board. Like, what are you talking about? But MC, you look like you're about to say something.
Yeah, like that's what makes me laugh. Like I don't know how this is gonna make me sound, but like this shit isn't that hard. Like go look at what you're doing in your day-to-day life. Like I don't think you're cutting the grass and washing the dishes at the same
At the
time.
same time.
Like that's not possible. Like you know, Lana's like challenge accepted. Like so and that's why I just firmly believe if people take a step back, stop looking at this as some magic process, and
Yep.
just be realistic. Yes, a
Mm-hmm.
developer can work on 2 things at once. However, there's limits to that, right?
Yep.
You can't ask me to go over there and do some crazy database stuff and then work on some front end stuff at the same time in a completely different like part of the code base, right? The context is not there. But hey, if I'm touching the database that impacts the API, that impacts the front end for the same exact, function on the page, okay, cool. Now we're doing some things here that actually make sense, right? I'm doing multiple things that kind of go together. Now we
Yep.
can talk about working on multiple things at a time. And that's where it's like, oh, can I listen to an audiobook and clean my desk at the same time? Yes. If I have the speakers or the headphones in the right place. But I can't write a book and listen to a book at the same time. It's going to be a babble of incoherentness. So it's just, and it makes me laugh because I think people view this, meaning agile, right, in quotes, as
Yeah.
this like nefarious, complex thing. And it's like, bro, you do this shit every day. You just don't understand like how to,
Mhm.
relay what you're doing at home in your house to like the work that you're doing. And there's so many similarities and commonalities to it where it's just like your WIP limits apply whether it's code or again washing the dishes or in cutting the grass. Like you can't physically do those 2 things at the same time, just like you can't physically work on 5 different things at the same time. And
And that's where priority kicks in.
once those
But
people, that light bulb goes off, it makes sense.
Yeah. And I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to say it out loud before I forget because squirrel. Um,
Squirrel.
so that's where prioritization like kicks in, right? Because you realize, hey, I have this list and all of it ain't gonna get done. So like let's create a limit. It's like I said, like it's not WIP unlimited, like it's limits. Like there's a limit on the work in progress. But something that I will mention though is when we talk about WIP limits, sometimes people fundamentally assume it to be something else versus what it actually is. So WIP limit stands for work in progress, right? But you can apply it to other areas of the Kanban board. Some people will just put work in progress limits on work in progress and nothing else. What do you think happens when that happens? Like, I want to hear you guys actually react to that situation because I died laughing. Like,
I mean, you go back to what I was saying before. You're now asking a developer to write test automation scripts, and that might be outside of their skill set or, to be frank, passion.
oh my god. So this happened to me in a previous team and just I still laugh to this day about this memory because like work in progress only had like 6 items, but test had like 34 fucking items. My god. Like, and no one is like peer reviewing their stuff and they just keep pulling work in. It was such a shit show. Oh my god. And I'm not holding back because man, I learned that the hard way. But the team wanted to decide to just let's just start with one, Tabby. Let's iterate on this. And I'm like, all right, let's see how it goes. Oh my god, I like fell flat on my face in the first sprint, but we were trying to incorporate WIP limits into the team. But yeah, learned that fairly quickly. But again, some people don't recognize that. Like they add WIP limits as they see fit, but like they're not focusing on the flow. The flow is still slow. Like your lead time is still 60 days, people. It hasn't changed just because you added WIP limits. Like there's something wrong there. So you guys talked about utilization, about how sometimes you can work on 2 things and maybe you won't be fully productive. I mean, there's many studies out there that talk about how you're more productive finishing things one at a time or couple things at a time versus doing everything half-assed. So what happens when leadership embody work-life balance in their perception, but they staff teams at 50%? So now you're a developer. I'm going to pick on Ranjit. Ranjit now has 2 sets of Scrum ceremonies, or he has one set of Scrum ceremonies and like a Kanban team. Is he going to be able to disassociate from one team and like transfer to another mindset for another team's work between the two? We want to talk about flow and efficiency and that boundaries of work-life balance, but you're not setting up your people, bro. What do y'all think?
Yeah, I mean that's obviously if you're stretching someone that thin, it's not going to be a good. They're just going to start neglecting things just
Yeah.
so they can keep going. The context switching, in my opinion, isn't as bad of a thing because
Mm,
I've been in situations where I had to do that a lot, and I just
yeah.
got good at doing context switching. But like to y'all's point, we are multi-threaded beings. Like we can only do one thing at a time. No matter how fast you're context switching, you can only focus on actually one thing at a time. So
Exactly.
yeah, I mean, if you're getting overloaded like that, certain things are just going to go by the wayside, whether you want them to or not. And chances are
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to be able to select what those things are. That person's going to choose just so they can kind of keep their sanity and keep getting work done.
Yeah.
Well, context switching is a real thing. And I once read a study that showed that they studied the brain, the way it works, and it actually showed that you lose 10% of your productivity per context switch. So if you
Mm-hmm.
work on 3 projects on 3 teams, it's 30% is just waste that goes to the garbage, which
Yeah.
means out of your like 40 hours, right? Third of that is just gone right there. So usually, unfortunately, that's a common situation when you have shared people on the teams. And usually what I try to do as an agilist is to try to either give that person 100% back to another team or try to get that person at 100% at my team.
Mm-hmm.
It's just it
Agreed.
doesn't work when people are shared. Like 2 projects that can work, but like I usually strive at trying to find a balance where the person can be at 100%. Otherwise it's really challenging. It's just a waste of companies and persons time and money and effort.
I would agree and also disagree with that just
Oh,
because
bring it, Ranjit.
I mean, it, you're right. If you're an individual contributor and you're just going and writing code, yeah, I would agree with that because you're context switching. You're not. Your mind has to readjust to this new area. you're not really thinking about the whole scope of all the problems across the stack that you're moving to or whatever. But if your job is to move across teams and that's kind of like your focus, I think the context switching has less of like an impact in that situation. Like if you're a principal engineer, an architect or something, and you're having to work with multiple teams and your scope is like up here just because you need to be coordinating these projects to kind of work things together, that is still context switching because you're going across projects, but that's more of an okay scenario in my opinion. At least you're not going to lose as much as.
Yeah, that's like a mile wide, an inch deep type of situation. But if you're asking the developer, right, to go, no, 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 I need you to like figure out these big architectural things for three different teams, it's not
Mm-hmm.
happening. And that's why like there's
Yeah.
I've pushed back. I've had a few instances there, but I've never gotten to the point where I want to say or want to do what I'm about to say and say, you know what? You're not working for us this sprint. Go work for the other team this sprint, and we'll have you the next sprint. And like watch the shit show that happens where someone's like,
Mm-hmm.
"But I need Ranjit right now," and I'm like, "No, Ranjit's working for Tabby's team this sprint because he's
Mm-hmm.
50%." And
Yep.
and that's where I think Lana, it really highlights the study that you brought up there, that every single time you context switch, you lose some productivity or you lose some sense of just where am I at right now, because I've seen developers like go deep and deep and deep and deep and deep, and it feels like we're about to solve the problem, and then like the fire alarm goes off and we have like a mandatory fire drill, and this developer is like, I'm not going because I need to finish this. And like he's like,
Yeah,
I'm
you
so
can't make me.
close. It's like, I'm so close, and if you take me outside for 30 minutes, I'm not gonna solve this problem. And
They're gonna start crying. Oh my
yes,
god, the world
that
is
was
gonna end.
that was his face. Because, and for this situation, it was like a week working on some like Google advertising thing, and we all know Google, like working with anything as big as Google is like very difficult. And it was
Mm-hmm.
just one of those where he legit took his computer, hooked his phone up to the Wi-Fi, and was coding from the parking lot because he was like, I cannot stop working on this. I can't,
He's
like,
invested. He's
but
gone too far.
and that's where the content, like, oh, it's only 50-50, they can make it work. But like, if Ranjit is about to solve the cure for cancer, and you're like, hey bro, I need you to work on this other vaccine real quick,
Oh
and it's
hell
like,
no. I'm finishing
good
this.
good luck when he to on figuring out and recovering all the waste that it's going to take to get all the way back down that rabbit hole. And that's where I think even 50% utilization is too much. Like, I'm
It's
okay
too
with
much.
like 25, because at that point you're really not like contributing that much
No, you're just giving
if it's
insight.
25.
You're not
Yeah.
actually giving or participating in the work that's being delivered. Something I was reflecting on while you're telling that story, MC. So you and I were in a Kanban certification class together back at, like, I think earlier last year, maybe. I can't remember. But we were playing with the online Kanban game called FeatureVon. Oh, it was so comical. Let me tell you all about this, because like we went through 3 iterations of the FeatureVon game, and the first round, none of us talked to each other. Like, we were just reading the instructions, like, the hell is this? Like, this game is dumb. Like, we were just criticizing the game, like, and we weren't talking to each other. We were just moving shit around, right? And like, it kept giving us blockers. We kept seeing pop-ups. We were so frustrated, and that was the intent of the game. But I think by round three, we were like yelling at each other, like, "Yo, you're blocking my flow. Can you move your card? Like, I told you this 3 times."
That's
And
awesome.
that is the true dysfunction of a team. Like, you have to talk to each other to establish flow. And just, I love stories like that, because the team is actually, yeah, collaborating with each other. But the first round is always comical. Like, they're either not talking to each other, or they're gaming the system, or they're like religiously reading the instructions that they run out of time. Like, okay, cool, you just finished the first round just reading the instructions, awesome. um I wanted to share that story because I love that story and how it was a great representation of flow, and not just, hey, play this game in this certification class. It like really clicked for me when establishing flow. So, with the time that we have, we are wrapping for time. I will ask one more question. And this is going to be perhaps a memory that we can all recall. So, when leadership disrupts the Agile team's explicit policies, for WIP limits because there's some sort of SDE going on, or production is down, or shit's just hitting the fan. How have we approached those situations? Just the agile like the team policies just go out the friggin' door. It's time to fix production issues right now.
I'm oh god, so people might hate me for this. I'm just shrugging my shoulders right now. Like, all right, is what it is. We'll figure it out because like shit happens and you got to be able to react to it. Like the last thing you want is a production event and you have to tell your customer like we'll get to it tomorrow because we're focused on other things today. Like and this is the part that makes me laugh because I've worked with a lot of scrum masters or interacted with, and when this happens they're like frantically trying to figure out like, well, if I take this out of Jira and then add that to Jira, my burn down chart won't be ruined and blah blah blah. And I'm like, who gives a shit? Like just get it done. Like I took that cue because I was that person a long time ago, and I took that cue from some senior developers on the team that I respected, and they were like, MC, chill. Let us figure out what the production issue is. We'll get it solved. We'll get it pushed to prod, and then we'll figure out the Jira and the rest of the sprint. We just tell leadership, like, it is what it is. Like, what do you want me to say? I can't clone myself. And that's where I think folks just gotta, like, operate in reality. It is what it is. Shit happened. You sold $1 million sponsorship, and someone's plans are going to be blown up because we now have to work on, fulfilling this sponsorship and build some new feature. Like, it is what it is.
I got a controversial rebuttal, but I want Lana and Ranjit to answer.
There is no right or wrong answer to that, right? I think it depends on your relationship with the leadership. There is leadership that just doesn't care about your limits, and no matter what, they will always disrupt all your policies, all your agreements. They will say, well, we want that, and just go execute. We don't care how it's going to happen. At the same time, like, remember being co-founder of a small engineering startup. I remember coming to my team when we were behind the schedule, and the fine upon the contract would be $5 million if we do not deliver that. It was that big of a deal. I came to my team and said, guys, that's our destiny out there. If we deliver it first in the market, we just need to do it, but that will require the A, B, and C. So we are actually going to disrespect all of our limits for quite a while, for a month, but to do that. And they say, Lana, don't worry, we'll do that. That's okay. It just depends on how you treat your team and if they understand the why behind that. No one likes when you're disrespected. When you come to the team and say, hey, those are the reasons. Are you okay with that? If you have this connection established, I think that can be a normal situation.
Always. It's always it's like our daily lives, like, of when an SDE is gonna hit. But before I give my rebuttal, Renji, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I'm kind of with MC on this one. It is what it is. The business writes your paycheck. If there's a priority that comes in, I mean, you've got to adjust and get the job done. It might suck, it might disrupt everything. And to Lana's point, as long as there's an understanding that goes both ways, where leadership understands that, well, we're going to be doing this because this is now priority, we're not going to be able to do this other thing, then all is good. I mean, okay, we got a context switch to this other thing. Let's do it and get the job done and go back to what we were doing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's what you got to do when it happens for the first time, or maybe it doesn't happen very often. I would unpack the frequency of it, because many times, like, I am a firm believer, if you don't learn from history, you are doomed to repeat it. And if we continue to respond to SDEs or production issues the way that we do, we run the risk of being inefficient and delivering, or not even delivering, on our promises. So something I would unpack with that is, how are we managing expectations with our customers and our stakeholders? Because there may be a chance they have no idea this SDE is happening. And then also, what can we learn from this SDE? Like, let's unpack that. Let's do a root cause analysis. Maybe we don't have to do it every time, but just prepare for the next one, because there's probably going to be another one too. It comes with the game of software development. That's something I experienced in a dysfunctional, safe environment where everything goes kaput over and over because SDEs are happening and we have no plan in place. We just react. But
was it safe or was it safe?
I don't think I was either MC.
That's a good one.
But anyway, sadly, we do got to wrap up, everyone. So I first want to thank both Lana and Ranjit for joining today's episode, Whip or Whipped. Thank you, Lana.
Thank you, guys. It was a really cool conversation.
It was. And thank you, Ranjit.
Absolutely. Happy to give the dev perspective on things a little bit. Thanks for having me on.
All right, and all you listeners out there, stay tuned for the next episode coming up, Agile Disrupted.